This is Hollywood and CBS presenting Forecast Number 4. Herbert Marshall, directed by Alfred Hitchcock in the first program of a proposed new series entitled Suspense. Tonight's Forecast program, ladies and gentlemen, represents the ideal form of collaboration. Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, brilliant English director of such outstanding motion pictures as The 39 Steps, Rebecca, and Foreign Correspondent, was eager to create a very special type of radio drama, the suspense story. As narrator and star for his production, he thought at once of the distinguished actor with whom he had been associated in countless British film successes, Herbert Marshall. Mr. Marshall suggested that they dramatize a certain favorite story of his. And that story happened to be the very one Mr. Hitchcock had had in mind. Mrs. Belloc Lowndes' classic in Chills, The Lodger. The Lodger is a work of fiction which springs from recorded fact. A story which begins in the year 1888 in London. A London terrorized by the fifth in a succession of recent murders. It was believed that these deeds were the work of one person, a tall, gaunt figure in a black Inverness cape, carrying a small, narrow bag. That meager description, provided by a highly unnerved witness, was the sum total of all that was known of the murderer. It was enough, however, to keep alive and alert the interest of all London, of all those in fine quarters, and all those in small, grimy houses, as, for example, Ellen Bunting. Ellen was no different from all the other middle-aged housewives dwelling in the great city's squalid Whitechapel district. She knew all the known facts of the case. As Herbert Marshall will tell you, Ellen knew it was quite proper to refer to this wielder of the knife as
the Avenger. Of course, Ellen Bunting was far more concerned with her personal problems than with thoughts of the Avenger. Yet the case of that strange, elusive killer quite often forced all other matters from her mind. There was that mad, meaningless scheme he seemed to follow. All his victims, for example, had been women. All had been young, attractive, and, oddly enough, blonde. But Ellen could no more understand the motive for his brutal slashings than could the police. This night, she and her husband, Robert Bunting, sat before their fireplace reading the newspaper account of the latest murder. The Avenger had struck again. As Ellen expressed it, he might be anybody. He might be the fellow you pass on the street.
Standing next to you. It's a terrible thought.
Yes. If only the police had something to go on. But it looks like that Avenger's just too quick for him.
Look, it says here that this girl he got last night was like all the others. Pretty, blonde, and, let's see, described by her friends as a very light-hearted girl. What a pity.
Did you ever stop to think who fits that to a T? In fact, fits all those girls?
Why,
my own Daisy.
Oh, that's a horrible thought. Well, maybe it's a good thing she's with her aunt, then, instead of here. London ain't a safe place for any girl right now.
Just the same, I can't help thinking how fine it'll be to have her back in.
Now, Bunting, you know that Daisy seems just as much my own daughter as she is yours. But I'm telling you, there's no sense even thinking about having her back right now. We just can't afford it.
Oh, I know that, Ellen. Only, well, maybe we could manage it some way.
How? Haven't I scrimped myself half crazy trying to keep us going? But you don't care about that, do you? No, your Daisy's more important to you than I am.
No, Ellen, that don't sound
like
you.
I can't help if it don't. What are we going to do? Tell me that.
We'll get along, dear. Something will turn up.
Oh, we haven't had a lodger for months. Nobody even comes to look at the room anymore.
Yes, but things will work out, Ellen.
Oh, they ain't never going to work out. Soon we won't even have a roof over our heads and...
What?
Oh, I'm sorry, Robbie. I didn't mean to take on so...
Oh, I know, dear, I know. It's all right.
Oh, I didn't think it. It's just that I've been so worried.
Well, don't you go worrying another second, old girl. Why, first thing you know, you won't be pretty anymore. You'll have your face all wrinkled
now,
and...
I'll see here,
come on, now, let's see a smile. Come on, just have one
oh,
smile.
Leave me
just
alone.
one smile like you used to, eh? Well, who do you suppose that could be?
Awful late for visitors. Bunting, do you think it could be somebody looking for rooms?
Well, it might be. You want me to go to the door?
No, I'll go. You just stay here.
Yes, all right. Now, be sure you get a good look at Louise before you let them in, dear.
Oh, I'm coming. Oh, I do hope it's... Yes, sir?
Is it not true that you let lodgings?
Yes, sir. Won't you come in, sir?
Thank you.
Could I take your cape, sir?
There's no need. Now, I'm looking for a quiet room. It must be quiet.
Oh, we have that, sir. Above all, our house is quiet. Your bag, sir. May I take it?
No, I'll hold it. You'll be so good as to show me the room, please.
Oh, yes, sir. It's right up these stairs, sir. This way.
Thank you.
You see, sir, there's just my husband and me here, and we're ever so quiet, and I'm sure you'll find this room to your liking, sir. Here we are. Now, I'll just light the gas. There.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
It is pleasant, isn't it, sir? And there's not many rooms with such pretty pictures, are there now? We've had them in the family for years, sir, and...
Pictures interest me very little. You see, what really impresses me about the room is the very simplicity of it, the bareness.
Yes, sir. It's not at all crowded, is it?
It will be quite suitable, Mrs.
Bunting's.
Mrs. Bunting. You see, I do a great deal of studying in my book here, the Holy Bible.
Yes, sir. Please, sir, let me help with your luggage.
No, don't touch it.
Oh, but I only wish to...
Oh, you only wish to help, of course. You must forgive me, Mrs. Bunting. It's just that I'm so very weary.
Of course, sir.
He bringeth them to their desired haven. Beautiful words, Mrs. Bunting.
Indeed they are, sir.
And now at last I have found my haven of rest.
Yes, sir. Then you'll be taking the room.
Let us see now. What are you going to charge me? With attendance, mind. I shall be staying in most of the time, and I shall be wanting meals.
Oh, we can see to that, sir.
Then does 30 shillings a week suit you?
30... Why, yes, sir. Yes, sir, that will be quite all right.
Good, and I shall pay you in advance. My name is Sleuth, Mrs. Bunting.
Mr. Sleuth.
Sleuth. Think of a hound, Mrs. Bunting, and you'll never forget my name. 23, 4, 30 shillings.
Thank you, sir.
And I think I should enjoy a little light supper now, Mrs. Bunting. Bread and butter, perhaps. Could you arrange that?
Well, certainly, sir. I'll do that now. And if you'd be requiring any beer or spirits...
Certainly not.
Oh, sir. What did I say?
I thought you understood me, Mrs. Bunting, and I had hoped that you and your husband were abstainers.
But we are, sir. We don't keep nothing about. I would have had to go out and...
Of course. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Bunting. I fear I spoke sharply. I don't wish you to think me rude. After all, you've been so kind, considerate.
I hope I know a gentleman when I see one.
Thank you very much.
Now, I'll just hurry with your supper.
Ellen, did he take the room?
No, don't bother me now. I have to get him some supper.
What did you mean?
Come to the kitchen where he won't hear us.
He took it, Ellen?
Yes,
He took the room?
Yes, we're all right now. Look, 30 shillings. A week in advance.
Oh, it's wonderful. Wonderful. And Ellen, do you see what this means?
Yes, you can have Daisy now.
Yes.
Here, Bunting, warm that teapot and put some tea leaves in it.
Righto. Yeah, do you know something, old girl? We're not going to worry too much about Daisy being in danger of that Avenger fella.
Whatever do you mean, Robbie?
Well, she's not a girl who takes a drink, you know.
What's that to do with it, please?
Oh, something I read in the paper while he was upstairs with the gentleman. They just found out that every one of the Avenger's victims had been drinking. They figured he must be some kind of a rabid abstainer.
What a peculiar chap. Now hurry, Bunting, please.
Yeah.
Two thoughts only governed Ellen's mind. The lodger's light supper and her own good fortune at having such a lodger. Mr. Sleuth was an eccentric sort, but then he was such a gentleman, so quiet, so very religiously inclined. She started up the staircase to Mr. Sleuth's room, her husband at her side.
It won't do no harm to be safe, though, once Daisy's back in London, eh? We'll see she stays close in the house, Well, I'll be downstairs. Hurry up with his supper, old girl.
She has cast down many wounded from her. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Come in. And to know the wickedness of folly.
Why, Mr.
Yes? What is it?
Those pictures. Those pretty girls. You've turned all their faces to the wall.
And that maneuver, that strange action, was the beginning of Ellen's concern. Soon there came to her a recollection of the black Inverness cape, the small, narrow bag, the urgent matter of alcoholic drink. And these details began to shape themselves into a pattern which grew more disturbing with each passing hour. The day following, the lodger did not leave the upstairs room once, nor did he leave the next day. And the oddness of this took its place in the pattern. Then, too, the approaching arrival of Daisy, her stepdaughter, added to her concern. On the second night, her sleep was restless with vague, horrifying images. And so when she heard the first stealthy footsteps outside her bedroom, she was instantly awake. Tensely, she followed those steps down the stairs, down the hallway. She heard the front door open and then click shut. Utter stillness fell upon the house. And outside, the streets were so silent she could hear distinctly the clock from a church tower a mile away tolled the hour. In her troubled frenzy, she pictured a lone figure plodding through the deep fog, moving quietly, stealthily, stalking, searching, finding. When, soon after she heard the lodger return, she sought to quiet the horrible dread which had possessed her. She assured herself that Daisy's arrival that day was no cause for alarm. Now she reasoned, how could there be anything really evil about so religious a gentleman as Mr. Sleuth? But for her there was no more sleep, merely a tormented state of half-consciousness, a state which suddenly dropped from her shortly after daybreak. Horrible murder. That was the piercing scream of a newsboy far down the street.
The Avenger strikes during night!
Ellen Bunting heard the boy cry out the Avenger's latest stroke, made during the night. Ellen's first glimpse that morning of the grave-faced lodger brought the sleepless night's warm terror full to the surface. But on the next instant, she saw the pitiable, helpless weariness in his eyes, and curiously, the terror began to pass. She found that she was hoping desperately that her fears were unfounded. Earlier, she had determined to tell Bunting of the awful convictions in her mind. Now, however, she felt she must be certain before she spoke to a soul. She knew there was one thing she must examine. That was the lodger's single piece of luggage. She'd thought of it often. What could it hold? Not much in the way of clothing, surely. It was too small, too narrow. It was more like a case. A case for a knife. It was along toward noon that Ellen found her opportunity to search the lodger's room. Soon after Bunting left to meet Daisy, Mr. Sleuth himself walked from the house. Ellen watched the tall, thin figure in the black Inverness cape disappear down the street, and then she rushed upstairs, into the room. Quickly, she moved to the closet. It was no different from what it had always been, utterly empty. She found nothing under the bed. She went then to the chest of drawers against the wall. She opened the top drawer and found inside nothing but a frayed shirt, 2 handkerchiefs. The next drawer, underclothes, socks. The next empty. There remained then only one possible place for the small, narrow bag, the bottom drawer, and it was locked. Tugging at the drawer, she heard suddenly the opening of the front door downstairs. Panic-stricken, she rushed out of the room and down the hall to the head of the stairs.
Upstairs, Ellen? Ellen, Daisy's here.
Oh, Mother Ellen, it's so good to see you. And whatever's the matter?
Yes, you've gone quite white.
Oh, well, I'm all right. I wasn't expecting you so soon.
Oh, you don't know how fine it is to be back, Mother Ellen. Oh, the country's all right in its way, but there's nothing like London now, is there?
No, there isn't.
But as long as that Avenger's about, I can see we're going to have to do something about these blonde locks, eh, Ellen?
Oh, don't worry about that. I'll dye them maybe, or just pin them under my hat.
Well, Daisy, I might as well get you settled.
Oh, now, Father, isn't that just like her? She's straight to the point, and no fuss.
Well, I'll bet a sixpence you'll have a dust cloth in your hair before you've got your coat off.
Mr. Sleuth.
Mrs. Bunting, I see my door is open.
Oh, we were just leaving, so we...
Does this mean that all of you have been in my room?
Oh, not at all, sir.
What must I do? Keep it locked?
But you see, sir, I was just tidying up a bit, and Mr. Bunting, he brought his daughter up, sir. She just arrived. This is Daisy, sir.
Pleased to meet you, sir.
She's been away for quite a long while, you see, Mr. Sleuth, and that's why we're a bit excited, you might
Yes,
think.
you must have been surprised when you came in, hearing us laughing and carrying on that way.
Yes, I must say I was. However, Miss Daisy, there are all types of joy, are there not?
Yes, I'm sure there are.
The despicable evil joy of the abandoned and the divine happiness of the blessed. A vast difference, that. You do understand me, don't you?
Why, yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Sleuth.
I devoutly hope so, Miss Daisy. Nowadays, there are so very few young women like yourself who do. In fact, I all but despaired ever of finding one.
If you'll excuse us now, sir, we'll be getting Daisy's things put away.
Of course, Mrs. Bunting, and I must be getting to my room. Believe me, Miss Daisy, it's been a revelation to meet you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I'm sure we shall have much to discuss.
He's a queer one, all right. But such a gentleman, isn't he?
At that moment, Ellen had been determined to pour out her terrible knowledge, and then the moment passed by. She told herself that perhaps the past few days had been nothing more than a grim illusion, a tormenting play of imagination. She would wait then until she had attended the coroner's inquest into the last Avenger murder. There, perhaps, she would hear evidence to disprove all her fears, to assure her there was no earthly harm in Daisy being so near the lodger. This was her gravest concern now, for on the next day, Mr. Sleuth made it a point to see the girl more than once. And fearfully, Ellen saw that Daisy welcomed his visits. As Ellen was preparing to step out to the inquest, she heard once more the voices of her stepdaughter and the lodger coming to her through the kitchen door. She hesitated before entering. Tense. Strangely apprehensive.
I do believe, Mrs. Sleuth, I've never known a gentleman with such funny ideas. Oh, Mother Ellen, you should hear what Mr. Sleuth was just saying.
Perhaps, Daisy, you would excuse yourself and...
He thinks people, and especially girls, should spend all their time praying.
I sought to explain, Mrs. Bunting, that all women are placed on this earth filled with evil. They therefore must struggle constantly to find the paths of righteousness.
Why, Mr. Sleuth, you mean a girl's not to enjoy life at all? Not to have fun?
Frivolity, my child, is the devil's breeding ground, and all his implements are there. Temptation, pleasure, wine.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, there's nothing I like better than a glass of wine, and I'm not...
You drink.
She didn't know what she was saying, Mr. Sleuth. Just a child, and Daisy, you'd better go now.
But I didn't say nothing wrong. What's the harm in a glass of wine?
She lieth in wait as for a prey, and increaseth the transgressors among men.
Why, I don't know what you mean. I never heard such nonsense.
You call Holy Scripture nonsense? So what I prayed against is true. You are beyond salvation.
That's not so. I'm a good girl, I am, and I won't have you saying that.
Daisy, go into the front room.
It's quite all right, Mrs. Bunting. I must be going upstairs anyway. I'm used to being misunderstood, you know. People never realize that my efforts are simply for the greater good of humanity.
Of course.
And that the power on high will direct my hand toward the expulsion of all evil.
Daisy, listen to me.
Yes?
I've got to tell you about...
About what, Mother Ellen?
Nothing. I've got to go out for a while now. I'll be back.
The moment to reveal the secret horror had come again and passed. Ellen's sudden recollection of Mr. Sleuth as he stood in the doorway had overwhelmed her. She must give him this last chance, this last frantic search for disproving evidence, this trip to the inquest. If that chance should fail, then she would tell Bunting or the police. So with the knowledge that Bunting was left in the house to look after Daisy, she boarded the underground train bound for the coroner's court. But as the train pulled away from the station, a new torture came to her, began to mount in her mind. It was the sudden realization that provided Sleuth was the murderer, she was equally responsible for his crimes. She had been giving him protection. If anything should happen to Daisy, she would be equally Guilty.
Guilty.
Fully as guilty as the Avenger.
Avenger.
Ellen, seated at the rear of the small but crowded inquest room, listened to each of the witnesses as they were called. And from one of them she found the first hope she had known for many days. This witness lived next to the alley in which the Avenger had committed his crime that night. She had seen him from her window, and the man she described in no way resembled Ellen's lodger. But in another moment, Ellen's hope was swept away. It was pointed out that the fog had been so heavy that night that the witness could not possibly have seen the murderer from her window. She left the stand, replaced by a Mr. Cannot. This elderly gentleman was certain that he had not only seen, but talked with the Avenger. It was in Regent's Park, he testified, only a few moments before...
A few moments before the murder, Mr. Coroner, when I saw him. He was quite a tall man, very gaunt-looking, and carrying a handbag.
A handbag, you say?
Yes, a small, narrow one. Just such a bag, I might add, as might contain a knife.
As Ellen heard these words, the tension which had been mounting up within her became almost unbearable. Rigid with horror, she gripped the arms of her chair. She heard the coroner...
I shall have to ask for more order in the court. And now, Mr. Cannot, I understand you heard this man speak.
Oh, yes, he had a rather high, hesitating voice. An educated man, I would judge, but quite mad.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as he emerged from the fog, he was talking aloud to himself. Believe me, sir, he was reciting scriptures from the Bible.
Scriptures from the Bible. Horrified, Ellen rose from her seat, only half hearing the confusion about her.
Are you asking us to believe, I would say, Mr. Cannot, that the man we're looking for would be least of all a religious man?
And that's where you're in error, Mr. Coroner. The religious note is the very key to the case.
Very interesting. That'll be all, Mr. Cannot.
Just a moment, sir. Don't you understand? The man you're after must be a religious maniac. That's the only explanation possible.
You will please stand down?
The court was dismissing the very truth. Ellen knew that now. She would no longer keep silent. Her hands shot forth, and she screamed.
I want to say...
Ellen Bunting, on the verge of speaking, had fainted. And then, when she was revived a few moments later, she said nothing. Her brain was in too great a turmoil, her nerves too shocked. Like one in a dream, she allowed herself to be led from the courtroom. The voices of spectators were only vague sounds to her.
I thought she was going to say something.
Yes, it was hysterics, eh?
Yeah, that bit about the knife.
Yeah, the knife.
The knife.
The knife. As Ellen Bunting proceeded homeward, the remarks from the spectators remained in her mind. She heard them over and over.
Yeah, that bit about the knife.
And just such a bag as might contain a knife.
We'll see she stays close in the house, eh? No harm in being safe.
Direct my hand toward the expulsion of all evil. Expulsion of all evil.
What's the harm in a glass of wine? I didn't say nothing wrong.
As Ellen neared her neighborhood, her dread increased. With each moving footstep, the grip of terror grew tighter about her. She moved faster. If only she were in time. She was 2 streets away from the house. Then one. Then she saw Bunting. Sharply, like the thrust of a knife, she realized what this meant. Daisy was left alone with the lodger.
Bunting!
Yes, Ellen, what is it?
Oh, Bunting, tell me, Bunting. Where's Daisy? Where is she? I say, where?
Why, at home.
Oh, listen to me. Try to understand. Sleuth is the Avenger.
What are you saying?
Our lodger. He's the Avenger, Bunting. Oh, but there's no time for that. Daisy's in danger. Hurry.
Yes. Daisy! Daisy!
Here we are, Bunting. Here we are.
Daisy!
Oh,
Daisy!
Daisy, where are you? I'll look in the kitchen, Bunting. You try the sitting room. Daisy!
Daisy!
Where are you, Daisy?
Answer me, Daisy!
Oh,
Let's try the bedroom.
she's not here. What about the dining room?
Look, she's not there. She's not downstairs.
Then there's just his room. on. Open the door.
Say, cut. What's the idea, Hitch? I have a few more lines to do.
As Mr. Marshall, the narrator, you have, not as Mr. Sleuth, the lodger.
Hitch, you can't stop the play right here. It isn't fair, you know.
Why isn't it, Bart? What more is there to say?
But, Mr. Hitchcock, won't people want to know what Bunting and me found in the room?
All right, Ellen. What precisely did you find?
Well, nothing, sir.
There. You see? Nothing. No lodger, no Bible. And that locked dresser drawer. What about that?
We unlocked it, sir.
And what was in it?
Nothing, sir.
You are certain, Mrs. Bunting?
Oh, you gave me quite a turn, Mr. Mr. Marshall. Yes, sir, I'm sure, sir. There was nothing.
Well, begging your pardon, Mr. Hitchcock, but don't you think we'd better just mention about Daisy?
I don't know, Bunting. What do you think we ought to say?
Oh, just that the reason she wasn't in the house when Ellen and me got there was, well, she'd gone out for a walk, that's all.
Did she enjoy it?
Oh, very much, sir. Made it to King's Cross and back in just under an hour, sir.
Splendid time, Bunting. Well, there you are, Bart. There's the story.
Now, wait a minute, Mr. Hitchcock. You can't do that. That's not the story.
Of course it's not. Now, look here, Hitch. Here's the fellow who composed and conducted all our music, Wilbur Hatch. He wants to know about this, too. Everybody does.
All right, Bart. What is it they want to know?
What became of Mr. Sleuth?
Oh, him. Why, he left that afternoon. They never saw him again. And now I think we ought to say something about the Columbia forecast
Mr. Hitchcock,
show.
sir, will you please...
Stop him, Mr. Marshall.
Hitch, listen to me.
Yes? What is it?
They want to know when the Avenger finally was caught.
Oh, well, let me ask you something, Bart. Are you acquainted with Loretta Young?
Yes, what's that got to do with it?
Well, in next week's Columbia preview series, Miss Young will take the starring role in the drama of an American Red Cross nurse. That's good news, isn't it?
Oh, that's great. But now listen, Hitch. You've just got to tell that audience exactly when and how Mr. Sleuth was caught.
Caught? Why on earth should he be caught?
Why? Well, he was the Avenger, wasn't he?
Was he?
Your guess, gentle listener, is as good as ours. Even Mrs. Bella Glounds, who wrote the novel, isn't entirely sure. For his masterful direction, our thanks to Alfred Hitchcock, whose latest pictures are David O. Selznick's Rebecca and Walter Wanger's Foreign Correspondent. For his superb characterization of Mr. Sleuth, our thanks to Herbert Marshall. And our thanks to the outstanding British character actor who tonight portrayed the role of Bunting, Edmund Gwen. If you liked tonight's program and want to hear more in the same highly original Hitchcock vein, radio versions of The Lady Vanishes and The 39 Steps, for example, write to CBS and tell us so. Your interest will help bring Suspense to the air as a weekly feature. Forecast next week presents from Hollywood, Loretta Young in Angel, first of a proposed series based on the adventures and the romance of a typical Red Cross nurse. From New York, a new sort of comedy show, Ed Gardner as Archie in Duffy's Tavern, with Gertrude Neeson, Colonel Stoopnagle, Larry Adler, and John Kirby's orchestra. Don't miss Forecast at this hour next week. Thomas P. Benson speaking. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
The Columbia Network takes pleasure in bringing you Suspense. Suspense. Stories from the world's great literature of pure excitement. A new series frankly dedicated to your horrification and entertainment. Week by week, from the pick of new material, from the pages of best-selling novels, from the theater of Broadway and London, and the sound stages of Hollywood, will parade the most remarkable figures ever known. CBS gives you Suspense. Tonight's presentation is one of the finest of the contemporary stories of mystery and terror. John Dickson Carr's famous novel, The Burning Court.
A glass of sherry by the fireside of a beautiful suburban home. What could be more comforting? You're an admirable host, Mr. Depard, and it's really a shame our first meeting is under such a cloud. It's also a shame I have so little time to tell you which one of your guests here murdered your uncle last week. Now, let's see now. I believe we're all here. Your wife, your friend, Mr. Stevens, Captain Brennan.
Yes, and incidentally, yourself. Just who did you say you were?
Well, no wonder you've had so much difficulty with the case, Captain. My name is Cross, Godin Cross, the writer. As a matter of fact, it's because of my just completed book, Poisoning Throughout the Ages, that I happen to be here now. And Ted Stevens there happens to be a member of the firm which publishes my work. I'd never seen him until tonight, but I've been told what happened. This afternoon, he began reading my manuscript for the first time on the train. The commuter's train, which every afternoon deposits him safely and soundly here in Crispin. I imagine he was halfway home by the time he finished the first chapter. Then he turned a page. Attached to the following leaf was a picture. And looking at it, the young man stiffened suddenly and all but cried out his shock. It was a picture of a young woman, and under it had been printed, famous poisoner Marie Dobré, 1676. Ted Stevens was looking at a picture of his own wife. Imagine his 25-year-old wife in 17th century costume. The face, the features, even a wistfulness of expression were identical. Even the name. Dobré was his wife's maiden name. But no, that was ridiculous. This woman in the picture was, well, one of his wife's ancestors. Yes, that was it. Simply an amazing family resemblance. Marie would be waiting for him at the station, and he'd have to tell her about it. He wondered why, however, she'd never told him about. Oh, well, but you don't discuss such an ancestor, do you? Ted Stevens glanced down at the chapter to which the picture had been attached. It was entitled, The Affair of the Non-Dead Woman.
Hello, Ted.
Stevens was almost jolted from his seat. It was Dr. Weldon, professor of English at the college, an old friend of his. Quickly, he thrust the picture beneath the manuscript and moved over.
Hi, I didn't see you, Doc. Oh, here, have a seat.
Oh, I thought maybe you were giving me the, what do they call it? The brush off?
Oh, no, say, as a matter of fact, Doc, you're the one man I do want to see.
Yeah? Very flattering.
Remember those discussions we used to have about murders?
Better than bridge anytime.
Well, I got the idea that you'd made sort of a hobby out of the old cases, the historical ones.
Well, I've studied quite a number of them, yes.
Ever hear of a woman named Marie Dobré?
Marie Dobré? Marie Dobré. Oh, yes. That was her maiden name, of course. One of the finest specialists in arsenic poisoning you could ever hope to find. Oh, we're almost at our station, Ted. Let's get to the door. Yes, a real charmer Marie was. Must have disposed of 100 husbands, lovers, suitors, and just plain friends before she was caught.
What happened to her, Doc?
She was beheaded and burned.
Crispin!
Oh, absurd, laughable. Ted Stevens kept saying this to himself, and yet what he knew was a foolish dread followed him straight through the small suburban station and clung to him as he reached the street. And there in the roadster was Marie, leaning toward him a little to hold the door open and smiling at him.
Oh, Ted, what on earth are you staring at?
That streetlight shining on your hair. I like that.
Oh, you're tight. Come on, get in the car.
Then, like a wisp of smoke, it was gone. The whole ridiculous fear, the delusion. When at home, Marie brought the cocktails into the living room. The logs were burning brightly in the fireplace, throwing a soft, dancing glow upon a room that was darkening with dusk.
To you, Marie.
And to you, dear.
As Stevens placed his glass down, he noticed the manuscript of my book. It was there on the table, right where he'd placed it when he first came in. Deliberately, he turned from it, and then turned back. The manuscript had been moved. Only an inch or so, but it had been moved. Keeping his back to his wife, he thumbed through that early chapter and discovered, just as he knew he would, that the photograph was gone. For a long moment, he thought of what to do. Then slowly, he turned around.
This book by Cross I brought home.
Yes?
There was a story of poisoner in it. Rather funny. Her name happens to be the same as yours. Oh, your maiden name, that is.
Oh, that is odd, isn't it?
Darling, was she a relative of yours?
Why, Ted, you're serious.
In a way, yes. Oh, I don't mean it's really important. It's just that, well, when you run across a person who's a dead ringer for your own wife and who lived 300 years ago and was a top-flight poisoner, well, you like to hear about it, that's all.
What on earth are you talking about?
Darling, be honest with me. Didn't you look at this manuscript when I was out of the room?
No.
You didn't take out a picture of a poisoner named Marie Debray?
I most certainly did not. Oh, Ted, what is this all about? What are you getting at?
Oh, just this. Somebody took that picture out of that manuscript since I'd been home. Now, who's that? Well, I'll take a look. Wait, I don't feel like... Why, it's Mark Depard.
Mark? Ted, wait a second.
Yes?
Ted, whatever it is he wants, promise you won't do it.
Promise I won't do
I
it?
mean, promise you won't get yourself involved. Please, Ted, don't go out tonight.
Say, what in the world is... Well, anyway, we can't let him stay outside. Mark, how are you? Come on in.
Thanks, Ted.
Just thinking about giving you a call later.
Oh, let me have your hat.
Oh, thanks. Marie, I hope you'll excuse me for popping in like this, but, well, I wanted to talk to Ted. It's rather important.
Oh, I don't mind at all.
Come on, Mark. We'll step into the library. Oh, you mind, dear?
Of course not, Ted. I'll be making the sandwiches for her.
Oh, grab that chair in the corner, Mark. Well, let's hear it.
What's the trouble? Ted, my Uncle Miles was murdered.
Murdered?
Oh, the talk hasn't reached you yet, but it's already started. Nothing definite, of course, just that there was something wrong about Uncle Miles' death.
But I don't... Mark, are you sure of this? You know he was murdered?
I don't know. Of course I don't. I just don't see how it could be any other way. Uncle Miles, you know, had been sick for quite a while, but last Saturday he seemed so much better that Miss Corbett, that was his nurse, decided to take the day off. And, oh, you know all this. You and Marie were over that afternoon. Anyway, Lucy and I went to the club that night, to that masquerade party, and we left the old boy completely alone. I've cursed myself 1,000 times since.
But what about your housekeeper, Mrs., what's her name? Henderson. Wasn't she around?
Oh, sure. In that little house out in back. We told her to look in now and then, but, well, that wasn't good enough. It was after midnight when Lucy and I got back. Uncle Miles was dying. Ted, it looked exactly like one of his regular attacks, but then later, After he was gone, I happened to glance under the chest of drawers in his room. There was a small silver cup under there, almost drained, and Uncle Miles' cat. The cat was still warm, but quite dead.
Oh.
I managed to get the cat out of the house and buried without anyone seeing me. Next day, I had the contents of the cup analyzed.
It was poison?
Yes. Arsenic.
Well, what do you want me to do?
Help me open the crypt.
What?
I want to have a private autopsy performed. Help me get Uncle Miles' body out of that vault. Oh, I know it's a tough job. The thing is sealed solid, but we can do it.
You mean without the police knowing about it?
Without anybody knowing about it. Mrs. Henderson's visiting her sister, and I managed to send Lucy over to the club.
You must be crazy. You're playing with dynamite, Mark. This is something you've got to tell the police now.
I can't take that chance.
But they'll have to know sometime. You're only
I've
delaying...
got to know first, I tell you. You don't understand, Ted. There was somebody in Uncle Miles' room that night, handing him something in a silver cup. Mrs. Henderson was on the porch by the window. She saw her.
She saw her?
Ted. She thinks it was my wife.
Oh, Lucy.
It doesn't mean anything to Mrs. Henderson yet, because she doesn't suspect anything, but, well, Ted, you've got to see why I've got to be sure, why I've got to know how Uncle Miles died. Because it wasn't Lucy, Ted. I know it wasn't.
Of course not, Mark. She had an alibi. Well, she was with you at the club, wasn't she?
Yes. Except for half an hour.
I see.
You'll help me, won't you, Ted?
When do we start?
As soon as you can make it.
Okay. Come on now. I'll get your hat. You trot on ahead, and I'll come over as soon as I can see Marie.
But you're not going to tell her about this.
Of course not. I'll think of something. Don't you worry about it.
No, thanks, Ted. Thanks a lot.
Marie?
I'm coming.
Darling, Mark asked me to...
I know, Ted. Here. You better take your sandwiches with you. You'll be hungry.
But you knew I was going out?
Yes, I knew.
You listened to us?
I couldn't help it, Ted. I had an idea what Mark's visit was about. The talk about his uncle's death. There's a lot of gossip about it in the village. That's why I tried to tell you. Why I didn't want you to get mixed up in it. But it's too late now, isn't it? I mean, you're going. I can tell by the way you look. Ted, wait a second. There's just one thing I want to tell you before you leave. And that is that no matter what happens, no matter what you find or think or believe, I love you. You'll remember that, won't you?
I'll remember you said so, Marie.
By the light of a dim kerosene lantern, Mark and Chet Stevens pounded their way through the thick shelf of rock that covered the Depar's ancestral tomb, pried open the great slab of stone which lay across the subterranean door, and then at last descended to the dank, ink-black chamber. They found the coffin. They dragged it from its crypt and placed it on the cold stone floor. They unclamped the lid and opened it.
Mark, it's empty.
What? That's impossible. It can't be.
But it is, Mark. You know what this means? That body wasn't in this coffin when it was placed here.
I'll swear it was, Ted. From the time that coffin was closed on Uncle Miles, somebody, the undertaker or Lucy or me, somebody was with it until it was buried. And the crypt was sealed right after.
Then somebody beat us to it. Somebody's broken in here ahead of us.
Broken in? Listen, Ted. Lucy and I have hardly left the house since the funeral. Do you think anybody could break in here, smash through that stone and cement without our seeing them or without our hearing them?
Well...
What?
Well, you might as well come on out then.
But who was that?
Me, Mr. Depard, up here. My name's Captain Brennan. I'm from the office of the Commissioner of Police.
From the...
Like to talk to you if you don't mind, Mr. Depard. Here, follow my flashlight up.
But I don't understand. How did you know about this?
By listening, mainly. You mind if we go up to your house, Mr. Depard?
Why, no. Not at all.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Freddie.
Look here, Captain,
Freddie, this is Mr. Depard, Lieutenant Gray.
Glad
to know you, Mr. Depard. And Mr. Ted Stevens, isn't it?
Well, how did you know my name?
Very simple. I got the names of everybody who was here at the Departs the day the old man died. You and your wife were included. Oh, here we are.
But I don't... Captain, who gave you those names?
Why, your housekeeper, of course.
Mrs. Henderson?
You didn't think Mrs. Henderson saw the dead cat, did you, Mr. Depart? But she did. She also saw you bury it. And we've been interested in the case ever since. Well, nice place you have here, Mr. Depart. Now, let's see. According to Mrs. Henderson, your wife was wearing some kind of a masquerade costume that night. What kind of a thing was it?
Well, it was a... Oh, there, you can see it. It was copied from the dress in that old painting over there.
Oh, yes. Funny, where's the woman's face?
It's always been that way, long as I can remember. Somebody must have thrown acid on it or something. Can't blame them much. She was a poisoner.
A poisoner?
Yes. The story goes that one of my ancestors was responsible for her execution. Marie Dobray, her name was.
Oh, yes. I've read about her. Learned all the poison tricks from one of her lovers, guy by the name of Godin Saint Croix.
Godin Saint...
Oh, yes, Mr. Stevens. We cops read now and then.
Did you say Godin Saint Croix?
That's French. We call it cross. Absolutely no limit to a cop's education, is there? But to get back to your wife, Mr. Depart, she was dressed like the famous Marie. Now, when Mrs. Henderson looked through that window...
Just a minute, Captain. Mrs. Henderson can't prove she saw a thing, and you know it.
What do you mean?
I mean you haven't any right to insinuate that my wife was in that room.
Well, who's insinuating? I'm trying to say that Mrs. Henderson, after thinking it over, realizes she was tricked by the costume. The woman she saw in the funny clothes, handing the cup of poison to your uncle, wasn't your wife at all.
What?
Because your wife is an unusually tall young woman. And the one Mrs. Henderson saw was fully half a head shorter. More on the order, let's say, of Mr. Stevens' wife.
My wife?
Captain, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I don't know. Why, what's the matter, Mr. Stevens? You're trembling like a leaf. Tell me now, just for fun, where was Mrs. Stevens that night?
She was home with me.
The whole evening?
Certainly.
She retired early?
Yes, we both did.
You, I suppose, were sound asleep by midnight.
Yes, I was.
Then how do you know where your wife was?
Well,
Look here, Stevens. She had to have a costume that would match Mrs. Despas. How did she manage that? Where did she get it?
Well, she never had one. She never had a dress like that.
And what about her motive? Why did she poison him?
I don't know.
Not for money, certainly. Then what was it? Hate? Did she hate Miles Despas?
Yes, she did. No. Oh, I don't know. I don't know, I tell you.
Brennan?
Yes, Freddie.
I phoned and got hold of Mrs. Depart and the nurse, all right. That Mrs. Stevens, I couldn't reach her. Her phone won't answer.
Okay, have her picked up.
I'm going home.
Stevens, come back here.
I'm going to get my wife.
Want me to stop him, Brennan? Now, let go.
Marie, where are you? It's Ted. Marie, what have you done? Maria. Oh,
good evening.
Who are you?
I? My name is Cross. Godin Cross.
Cross? Where's my wife? What have you done to her? You fiend, what have you done to my wife?
Why, nothing at all, young man. Here, sit down.
You're lying. Something's happened to her. The police just phoned. There wasn't an answer. Why are you here?
Why am I here? Well, because your wife, reading my chapter on the Dobrays, realized I knew more about the family than even she did. Because she found my phone number on the front cover of the manuscript. And because I know an exceptional case when I hear one. Does that answer your question?
No, and you know it doesn't. Can't you see I've got to know whether...
Yeah, I see. Whether your wife is that Marie Dobray, who was burnt by order of the High Tribunal for all poison cases, the burning court of France, witchcraft, black magic, the world across the threshold. You're quite sure, no doubt, also that I'm Godin Saint Croix, who first wooed her. No, my boy. No, my real name happens to be, of all things, Tom Simpson. Most unsuitable for a distinguished writing career. And Marie Dobray is no more your wife's real name than mine is Godin Cross.
What?
Your esteemed wife was an adopted child, Mr. Stevens, adopted by people in Canada named Dobray, remote members of the real family of poisoners.
I can't believe it. Why Why didn't she tell me?
Why? Because until I told her half an hour ago, she didn't know it herself. You see, in the course of my research on the family, I found out about it. And in the course of talking with your wife, I found out something else. How for years she was haunted by the fear that she might be a poisoner by inheritance, by blood. And you can see, can't you, why she never talked about it, her past to you?
Yes.
And yet, Mr. Stevens, you had all but made her forget that past. You. And that's why she was willing to lie, to steal a picture, do anything, in order to hold you to her.
Yes, I see that now.
You know, young man, I rather think she loves you. But as you will see, though, she comes only when I call her. Mrs. Stevens?
You mean she's...
Yes, Mr. Cross.
Marie, it's you. You're all right?
Oh, yes, dear. We're both all right now, and nothing can change it, ever.
Marie, listen.
Don't say Marie, dear. Say Maggie.
Maggie?
Oh, that's my name, my real name. Maggie McTavish. And it's a lovely name, dear. The most beautiful, gorgeous...
Darling, please. You don't understand. The police, they think you had something to do with Miles' death.
They think I did.
So, now, Mr. Stevens, before we go back to the Depas, don't you think you'd better tell me everything that's been said and done up to date? Having just saved your wife's soul from the burning court, now I'll wrest her body from the electric chair. Yes, Mr. Depas, truly excellent sherry. Don't you think so, Miss Corbett?
Yes. Yes, it's very nice.
Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I happen to be here. So let us consider first that supernatural hocus-pocus in the crypt. That body that walked out of the sealed tomb. That body that never was in the tomb.
Never was in the tomb?
No, Mr. Depas. The murderer knew that very soon Mrs. Henderson's story would bring about an investigation. He had to get rid of the well-known corpus delicti.
Yes, but who could have kept the body out of the tomb?
Who, Mr. Depas? Why, you, sir.
What? I don't understand.
Well, it's very simple. You had the opportunity. I believe you said yourself you were alone with the body before the burial. And you had the strength. I dare say you carried it down to the furnace, where it's now probably nothing but ashes.
Ridiculous. Why would he spend an hour smashing into a crypt for a body he knew wasn't there?
Why, Captain? To impress Mr. Stevens, his witness. And also apparently you.
Oh, that's perfectly fantastic.
Fantastic? Oh, no, Lucy. Just comic. And I suppose, Mr. Cross, that I also put on a woman's masquerade costume, went into my uncle's room and handed him a nice cup of arsenic.
No. That had to be done by a woman. Your accomplice, as matter of fact. Oh, now, come. You mustn't all look at Mrs. Depas, because Mark Depas' one noble act was his frantic effort to prevent his wife from being charged with the crime. A crime which he and Nurse Myra Corbett committed.
Myra Corbett?
Why, you...
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Stevens, this quiet little lady beside me.
Why would I do such a thing?
Money, Miss Corbett. A cutout of Mark Depas' inheritance. Payments for services rendered.
That's an absolute lie, Cross.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, Captain Brennan never bothered to check Miss Corbett's whereabouts on the night of the murder. Why even think of the nurse? She was the custodian of the old man's health.
Oh, you're crazy.
And yet who but a nurse could so naturally offer the old man a cup? A cup he was sure contained medicine.
You're making it up. The whole thing, you're just
And
making it
who
up.
but Miss Corbett, living right here in this house, would know what kind of masquerade dress she must copy, would know when Mrs. Henderson would pass the window that night, pass and see her, and accept her, she hoped, for Lucy Depas.
No, that's not true.
Oh, yes, Miss Corbett. Yes, Miss Corbett, that dress was the touch that wrecked you. That was your own idea, wasn't it? Not Mark's. You weren't content with a mere murderer's share of the profits. You wanted a wife's share, half of the whole estate. You wanted Lucy Depas convicted and out of the way for good. Well, I give you a toast, Miss Corbett, with Mr. Depas' excellent sherry. To a particularly ruthless poisoner. And yet, you know, on the whole, I'm rather partial to female poisoners. Why, only tonight I...
Here, let me get to him.
Mr. Cook, what's the matter, Brennan?
This man's dead. Dead? And from cyanide, if I know anything. Cyanide from that glass of sherry. Cyanide that a nurse could get quite easily. That glass was right beside you, Miss Corbett, and nobody else was near it. Too bad he didn't drink it as soon as you hoped. A second ago, we had nobody to use against you. But we have now, Miss Corbett. We have now. And I arrest you for the murder of Gordon Cross.
Close to 5 months ago that the prominent author was murdered. And tonight, Myra Corbett pays with her life for that crime. The former nurse, at first protesting her innocence, in recent
Yes,
weeks has grown...
I'm in here, dear.
Oh. I thought you might... Oh, what did you cut it off for?
Huh? What do you mean?
The radio.
Oh, yeah, well, I thought you wanted to talk.
Oh, Ted, don't you think I know you better than that? What was on the radio?
Well, there wasn't any... Okay. It was about Myra Corbett. She goes to the chair tonight.
Oh,
I didn't think you wanted to be reminded.
I don't really. But making such an effort to hide it only keeps it alive, doesn't it? All right, darling. Know what I came in to ask? If you wanted a cocktail before dinner?
The largest one you've got.
Fine. I'll get out the ice cube.
I know. If I'll fix up the fire. Okay, Maria, a deal. Where are some papers to start it?
Right there by the bookcase. And the name's not Marie. It's Maggie. Because, darling, Marie's dead and gone forever.
Oh, no, Marie. We're never dead. Neither of us. It was your hand that touched that glass. I know that now. And I could return the favor. But instead, I shall ask that you dispatch your husband. This one, like all the others. Now, just a little bit of poison in the drink, Marie. Any kind of a drink.
What kind, Ted? What kind of a cocktail shall we have?
Oh, any kind, darling. Any kind at all.
You've just heard The Burning Court from John Dixon Carr's famous novel, the first in Columbia's new series of outstanding classics and chills by world-famous authors. Tonight's play, ladies and gentlemen, has one rather special significance we think you'd like to know about. As you perhaps have heard, every fighter to cherish a secret desire to do an abrupt about-face. He pines for the part of a blackguard. Well, tonight you witness the fulfillment of one such desire. The role of that literary and quite infamous diehard, Gordon Cross, was portrayed by none other than Hollywood's expert provoker of laughs, Charlie Ruggles, here in New York for the world premiere of his latest screen success, Friendly Enemies. The role of Marie, well, that was enacted by a young lady who long ago won national acclaim as one of Broadway's most accomplished dramatic actresses, Miss Julie Hayden. Thank you, Charlie Ruggles and Miss Julie Hayden, for your splendid performances. The play tonight, as all plays in this series, was produced and directed by Charles Vander, written by Harold Metford and scored by Bernard Herrmann. Next week, we bring you an intensely exciting and moving drama, The Life of Nellie James. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.